everybody. Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report. Today we have returning guest Igal of Chutzpah Productions. You may remember he's been on before as he makes absolutely amazing and poignant documentaries. Specifically, we've been discussing documentaries that he has made since October 7th, 2023 about the atrocities that happened. Igal had a few different documentaries in process and ongoing. And today we want to catch up with him for a few reasons. Not only does he have particular experiences in the media realm to share with us about his documentary productions and the release and that distribution process, but also as a resident of Canada, as an Israeli living in Canada, we wanted to really touch base with Igal and learn what is happening up there, because the news in America just really, it's very little trickles about what is happening among the Jewish community or against the Jewish community in Toronto, Montreal, and other places. So Igal, we are so glad that you can take time out of your schedule and talk with us again. I know you have a lot going on, and we could probably talk for hours about different topics. But just give us an update. Let's start with your work. How about we start with your work? Give us an update on some of your documentaries, what's available, what's coming to fruition, what's in process, and then let's dig into a little bit about what your experiences are there in Canada.
Sure. First of all, Amy, thank you so much for having me. I always love coming on. And basically right now, as you know, I finished the film The Killing Roads, which has been out there for a while and has been watched by millions of people. And I encourage anyone who's looking at us right now to view it at thekillingroads.com. You can view it for free there. And the film has really received wonderful, feedback and critical acclaim. And I'm very happy about that. We're still trying to get it on campuses and to communities. And I encourage anybody to reach out to me, and we'd love to bring it to your community. I'm also...
I just want to interrupt you real quick. I just want to let our audience know that The Killing Roads is appropriate, I think, for anybody over 18.
Yes.
If you have kids that are teenagers, maybe high school level, I encourage you to watch it first before you share it with them. I do think for college age Bible studies or youth groups or college groups or young adults, might be an important viewing as a group where you could talk about it. And anybody who wants to screen it, we can help you get connected with Igal. He could join by Zoom, if not in person, if possible, if there was a screening with a bigger group.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It has graphic content, so definitely don't view it with anybody who's under 18. And then I'm finishing a film right now called 710 Days Later, in which I'm producing and editing it. And as we were speaking, I'm taking a break from the editing. It's a film that's directed by Dotan Naveh, who's an Israeli director, and filmed by Lior Cohen and Gabriel Volkovic. And it follows a group of women survivors from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, a WhatsApp group that survived the 7th, and we followed them for 710 days. And basically, how do you move on? In it, some of them have lost loved ones, some of them knew people who were hostages, and basically, how do you move on? And how do you move on from what happened? Is it possible to move on? And we really showcase the resilience of these women, but also of the people of Israel. And so it's a wonderful film. It's very different. There's no graphic content in it at all. We talk about the 7th. We really explore the 7th, but with no graphic footage, which was a challenge coming from The Killing Roads. But it's a really beautiful film. It, aside from resilience, the love these women have for one another and each other's families, and really being there for each other, and you really see that, and you understand the impact of the 7 on a very basic human level, and how much they suffered, but how much they weren't going to allow savage terrorists to dictate their lives past the 7th. And I think that really is a reflection of Israel. And people who support Israel, all of us who support Israel, where we cannot allow jihadists, woke progressives, kafir Karens, Islamo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them, to dictate the lives of the Jewish diaspora, the people of Israel, and anybody who supports democracies and Western world freedom. This is something Israel is, as the cliche goes, Israel is the first line of defense, but it's not just Israel thereafter, but it's just true. And you see it unfold on the streets of the United States. We saw it, unfortunately, last night in the tragic murder of the two Israeli embassy employees, which is heartbreaking. And you see it also on the streets of Canada, which, is the perfect segue to Canada, where this is what's been happening here, just like in the States for 2 years, except where your past administrations, specifically the Democratic Biden administration, allowed it to flourish and happen, and Trump put a stop to it, right? The Republicans have put a stop to it and have been really
Well, they're
fighting.
trying. Yeah.
They're trying, and they're really fighting the Democrats, I guess, who are all for jihad or for anti-Semitism. Here
It's
in
all free speech because it's free.
Yeah, it's all free speech, and but free speech, I don't believe that free speech has a limit. But when free speech becomes violence, when did violence become free speech? And
Right.
that's the question. When did violence, and these individuals who are being, their visas are being revoked, have been violent? And there's videos of them being violent. There's also videos of them calling for violence. So one has to ask themselves, when did violence become free speech? And is it only when Jews are, the victims? Is it only?
Well, and that's the point, right? Do we have to wait for two Jewish people, Israeli or not, to be shot in cold blood, who have nothing to do with they're not policymakers, they're not
Yeah.
soldiers in the IDF, and
Progressive seems to believe that you do. And in Canada, if we talk about Canada, this has been the issue here in Toronto, where about a week ago there was a protest, and somebody lit up a smoke flare outside of a well-known Jewish establishment. People were sitting in the patio, inhaling this smoke. There's footage of the police standing there, like right beside this person. And that's a violent act, by the way. It is completely a violent act. And the police just stands there until one lady just got up and started screaming at them. And then they moved in and they asked them to leave. Now, because it was documented and published, they arrested the person and charged them with mischief. Had it not been documented, right? Had it not been published online, had they not been made to look like fools, they would have done nothing. And that's been the case in Canada. In Canada, specifically in Toronto, we have a mayor by the name of Olivia Chow, who many people believe is fully complacent with the jihadists in this city, because she has allowed them to do things that no other protest has been allowed. Be violent, extremely violent, decide to stop traffic and just pray in the middle of the street, mass prayers in the middle of rush hour, which, by the way, is not allowed. It's fully not allowed. It's illegal. She's allowed them to harass Jewish businesses constantly, again, under the guise of free speech and freedom of protest. Well, what about the victims? What do Jewish businesses have to do with Israel? It doesn't matter. When it comes to Jews, it does not matter in the city of Toronto under the mayor Olivia Chow, supposedly, I guess. We have protests inside of Jewish neighborhoods. I'm talking about suburbia. They purposely come out to the Jewish neighborhoods, small streets, and start harassing Jews. Now, it doesn't happen every week, but it certainly happens. We have school shootings, at specific Jewish secondary, Jewish elementary schools, fire bombings, constant threats online. We had a police podcast that was taken off the air. And by the way, if anybody doesn't believe me, by all means, Google this. It's all verified. You can find it easily.
yeah, because it's
But
not being reported in our press. That's
yeah,
for sure.
we had a podcast from the police, two Muslim officers who were discussing how great it is that after October 7th, so many people have come to Islam. Literally open. This is, by the way, in full uniform with the police emblem on the table. This is the podcast. That was a step too far. First, the police said, "Oh, we're sorry that feelings were hurt," and then they took it off the air. But already everybody had the podcast. I'm not sure what happened to the officers. I don't think they were suspended either. But this is what we have. We have a two-tier system here. When Jews protest because they're in smaller numbers, they're physically removed. They are not allowed to counter protest. We just had a situation in downtown Toronto where there was one counter protester, and the police basically forced him to move. And here you have, I don't know, 200-300 jihadists calling for murder, violent murder against Jews. They're not being touched because the police don't want to spend the time protecting this individual, because they know that if he's left alone to protest, which he also has a right to do, they'll come and be violent towards him.
I mean, isn't that the line of reasoning for whenever they cancel a Jewish speaker or anybody? It's like, well, we're canceling it for your safety. Well, you're silencing us, and you're using that as a cloak.
But even worse than that, you're allowing terrorists to win. You're allowing people to terrorize. You're allowing Jews, forget that it's Jews. You're allowing Americans to be terrorized. You're allowing Canadians to be terrorized. The fact that we happen to be Jewish, that doesn't matter here. The fact that I'm Jewish, you don't know what my position is on Israel when you see me on the street. And when I enter a restaurant or a coffee shop, you don't have a right to bomb that coffee shop because that owner have to be Jewish.
That's right.
And that is what's happening in Canada, at least in Toronto. Montreal is a different beast of its own. Montreal is basically the biggest hub of terrorism in North America. The jihadists there are fully crazy, violent, smashing windows up and down the streets, spray painting wherever they want.
It's terrible. That's probably one of the most beautiful cities in Canada, in my opinion. It's always been my favorite when I was a kid growing up. When we went to Montreal, I loved it because I just felt like it was a little slice of Europe or something in North America.
But it's stunning. And when you have unchecked immigration where no one was actually vetted, and you bring in 1 million people and you claim they're refugees, and maybe they are, but within that group, there is a high percentage of violent, anti-Semitic, racist, anti-Western jihadists. That's the end result. And most of them end up either in the suburbs of Toronto or in Montreal. That's the end result. And that is the actual problem of Canada. Lack of admitting that it is in the top 3 anti-Semitic countries in the world today, in the Western world. Behind Australia, maybe. Some would say it's number 1. Channel 14, Israel, has said they're number 1. In terms of attacks and percentage, the Jewish community is the most attacked community in Canada. I think 10 years running now, we're number 1. So I guess, yeah. But this year especially, and the majority of the attacks come from jihadist communities. I'm not saying there's no attacks from, extreme right-wing neo-Nazi. But the majority of the attacks come from the jihadist communities. And nobody wants to say that because it's not politically correct, because then they throw out the whole
Islamophobia. Right.
But in the reality is that no Jews now one member of the Jewish community has gone into Muslim-dominated neighborhoods and protests or bombed their restaurants, smashed their windows, told people not to go there, screamed to murder Muslims, screamed to murder Palestinians. No one in the Jewish community in Canada has done that.
No.
Over and over on the streets of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, heck, even Halifax.
Wow.
You have individuals who are screaming in Arabic to murder Jews. And in English, they have their slogans that are essentially a genocide of the Jewish people of Israel. But they're also calling for violence and globalizing the Intifada. And after last night's attack in Washington, we know what that means.
That's the fruition of it, exactly.
Yeah, against Jews. And that's Canada. But beyond the municipal level, on the federal level, we have a brand new government in the form of our new prime minister, Mark Carney, who's his foreign minister on her first day defamed Israel and lied about Israel. First day. Canada has a lot of issues, but no Israel. You have 10% of the Liberal Party, the governing Liberal Party, signed a pledge, to support Palestinians, to support and to stand up against Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 10%, and 17 of them were elected out of the 169 or 170 members of parliament from the Liberal Party, governing Liberal Party, who were elected. So now, for sure, guaranteed, the numbers are probably higher, but we know for a fact that 10% of the Liberal Party, the governing party of Canada, is extremely anti-Israel, does not care about anti-Semitism at all in their country. In fact, one can make the argument, and I could be wrong, that they have no issues with anti-Semitism in Israel, in Canada, as long as Jews are being, attacked, and as long as the framework is, I'm an anti-Zionist, I'm not an anti-Semite, which we all know actually means you're an anti-Semite.
Right.
And so that's Canada. We have a very extremely hostile government that's been in power for a week, 2 weeks, who's on 4 or 5 different occasions has come out strongly against Israel, lied, blood libeled Israel fully when it comes to the whole, and agreed that in 48 hours, 14,000 babies are going to go starving and dying. Yeah. It was a complete blood libel, but the liberal government ran with that. Our public broadcaster alluded to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an incident that just happened in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, where a group of politicians were taken inside, I believe, Jenin, by Palestinian politicians and a swarm of media. There was a communication with the Israeli army that they're not going to deviate, and they did. And they went into this closed-off area. The soldiers there didn't know who they were. All they saw were a swarm of people coming towards them. And so they shot in the air as a way of saying, leave.
Stop, or leave, okay.
That became a whole story. Now there's video, full video that shows exactly what happened. And you see the Palestinian politicians basically bringing the European politicians, the Canadian politicians over, right? And they knew what was going to happen. They knew it was a closed area. They knew they couldn't enter that area. And it's closed because there's been attacks and massive terror attacks in the city of Jenin against Israelis and also against Palestinian forces from various terrorist forces living there. They shot it in the air as a way of warning them to leave. So look, I'm not saying that's the best situation, probably could have been handled differently. But right away, the Prime Minister of Canada, Israel shot at Canadian officials.
Yeah.
And when you look at the tape, you actually see what happened. Again, it's all this mechanism to defame, delegitimize Israel, because our Prime Minister wants to, doesn't want this country to be the 51st state, has issues with the President of the United States, and wants to become close to Europe. And in Europe, the progressive wing governments, be it France, be it the UK, are pushing a Palestinian state announcement in June. And so Canada wants to be a part of it. And this new government doesn't really care if it's telling the truth about Israel or it doesn't. So it defames it. And so it doesn't believe, or it doesn't try to really fight against anti-Semitism. The most they'll do is they'll say, oh, we're funding Holocaust education, which is great. I'm all for funding Holocaust education. But how does that help the average Jew on the street when their businesses are being smashed and bombed, while they're being harassed, while they're being shot at, while they're being threatened with violence from the jihadists in this country that this liberal government has brought in the past 10 years? And that's the situation in Canada, unfortunately, for Jews. There's 400,000 Jews. The situation hasn't been this bad, I would say, in 50, 60, maybe 80 years. It is the worst time. I've lived in Canada for nearly 40 years. It has never been this way. And there was a reason. And it is this way now because an influx of jihadists has been allowed into this country to basically terrorize, not just the Jews, by the way, they're also terrorizing other citizens, right? Through their actions, through their protest, but mainly the Jews. And the elite progressives who control the government here and post-secondary schools and the unions are embracing this anti-Semitism, fully embracing it.
Yeah.
And that's the situation in Canada.
And it's interesting that that staged push into the closed area by the Palestinian politicians and bringing the European politicians in. This is how much they know that the IDF and Israelis value life because they knew they weren't going to get shot at, right? If this
This was a
looked
show.
threatening or boding, they knew it would be some sort of warning shot or some sort of, pushback, anything that they could spin to say, look at these rough and bullying IDF.
I can prove that they knew that, and I can prove that they incited that, and they did that
Mhm,
because they had at least 12 camera crews with them.
mhm. Yeah.
It
And
was
they
all
also
filmed.
weren't fearing for their own safety. They knew they weren't going to get shot at point blank by the IDF, that they wouldn't do that. That's
It was
not the
all a show. It was all a show, and this is what's happening. The Europeans want to defame and diligence, and Canadian, unfortunately, the Canadian officials as well, because that's now, I guess, Canadian policy. The Canadians and the Europeans wanted to defame and delegitimize Israel in the eyes of the world so they can justify calling for a Palestinian state and basically they are rewarding terrorists who raped and murdered Jews on October 7th
Mhm.
with a terrorist state because Salman Rushdie, Benny Morris, and all of these people who believe in a Palestinian state realize, even before the 7th, but certainly after the 7th, that what you're going to be creating, if you give them a state, is another failed terrorist Muslim state where Christians
Right. The
barely have
Gazans are no better off. The regular
Catholics won't be
Gazan
better off.
young
And
person.
and imagine when Fatah will lose if they ever have another election. Their last election was 2006.
Mhm, mhm.
They are the beacon of democracy. But imagine when they have an election and Fatah loses and Hamas or some other, new formation of a Hamas-like organization takes over. What then? Does
Yeah.
Israel then have a
I mean,
right?
that's definitely part of the conversation that's being left out. If you were to give make a Palestinian state, have a state of Palestine, what is the proposed leadership? Because it's not going to be one that's good for its own citizens, let alone being neighbors to whatever land is left, if any, for an
It won't be
Israeli
good for
state.
minorities there, and minorities, I mean Christians.
Mhm.
When Israel was in charge of Bethlehem, there were over 80% Christian population. Today you have 12, maybe under 10 at this
I think
point.
it's under 10. Yeah.
And they want to blame Israel for the Christians leaving. Well,
Yeah.
that's not true. The only reason Christians, the PA still allows Christians to have at least some freedom there is because, Christmas and it brings in a lot of money
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. They have to have something to prop up and say, see, we love our Christian citizens. So, you brought up a good point a few minutes ago about your Canadian government and how they're kind of a little bit duplicitous or excuse me, insincere in that they'll foment or allow or encourage or just keep their hands off all this jihadist kind of activity, and yet they'll kind of throw money at Holocaust education, whether it's in the schools or elsewhere. And yet we're already dealing with the Holocaust happened 80 years ago, and Holocaust denials, something that most reasonable people think is abhorrent. And yet now we're what, 19 months out of October 7th, and the denial for October 7th is rampant. And you've already produced and created one historical archive, uh,
Yeah.
the Killing Roads, that really documents this on both an historical level where you have the footage and the CCTV and those sorts of things, but also at the personal level, where you're weaving in those firsthand stories, and then you're creating the other one with the women, which is, I think, just fabulous to have sort of a female-centric film that female group is actually representing a microcosm of Israel and even the Jewish community as a whole, as diverse as it is. So what are you feeling as you navigate through the media industry, right, as a filmmaker and personally as a resident of Toronto, and I'm assuming you travel also to Vancouver and other places. Just give us a little bit of your personal feedback of how this anti-Zionism attitude and this October 7th denial and anti-Semitism in general is affecting you or your experiences with it.
I think on a personal level, I've lost a lot of friends in my industry. I don't think it's any secret that the media industry with television or film is mostly filled with left-leaning ideologues and some would argue propagandists. But I've lost a lot of friends, and that's okay. I can live with that because I now know where they stand when it comes to the rape of Jewish women or the murder of Jews. So on a personal level, I lost friends. On a professional level, it is very hard to be a very open, conservative, Zionist filmmaker in Canada, let alone anywhere. Heck, probably even in Israel to some extent, with who the people who dominate the field. But that's okay because you find ways to make the films, whether people help you, whether it's GoFundMe campaigns. Um, I've never been one to shy away from a film just because there's no budget. And so that doesn't stop me. I've found myself being much, much more vocal. I've always been vocal, but now I'm extremely vocal because I can tell you that in Canada, the only way to change, not even policy, but to make people aware, and especially the government, is to shame them. Canadians hate to be thought of as racist, even though this is a very racist country, especially towards the indigenous community, where there's indigenous communities that this government still has no water for, right? 10 years ago, this government promised water to various indigenous communities in Canada, and there's communities still who are not connected to water, but there's $500 billion to send to Ukraine. But okay, that's fine. But so Canadians hate being shamed, especially Canadian politicians. And I think the only way to fight them, and that's why I'm being so vocal, is to shame them and shame them with facts. We don't have to use propaganda. We don't have to use lies. We just need to use facts.
Mhm.
Shame them and showcase to the world what Canada has become. I think it has made me much, more understanding that this is really the only way to bring about change. The social media and media in itself has the power to do so. That's really, and Canada in itself is an amazing country. I adore this country. I'm very much Canadian, um, and it is heartbreaking to see what has become of this country. Not so much, not just on the anti-Semitic front, where you have all of these jihadists roaming the streets and doing whatever they want, but also on just on the social fabric front, where this woke ideologues simply destroyed this country, really destroyed this country, and are censoring anyone who doesn't agree with them. We have a bill that's up in Parliament here. Bill C, either 68 or C69, I always forget the number, which is effectively going to censor people. It's going to deem whatever the government is going to appoint individuals to basically, decide what is harmful speech and what isn't. Sort of what you have in the UK
I was
right
going to
now.
say, it sounds like the UK has that sort
So
of.
Canada is basically like the UK. We're a generation behind. So it's very similar to what the UK has, where you have now 200 people in jail for up to 2 years for posting things online. And we're not talking about things that are, racist or things along those lines, disagreeing with the government and things along those lines. You had the Canadian government fund a study, again, not making this up, full out in the open. Anybody can Google this, fund a study in which they monitored what they deemed as right-wing Jews who were opposed to the government and what the government stance on October 7th. They spent $180,000, I believe. I might be wrong on that, but somewhere around there on a study out of the UK to monitor right wing, what they perceive is right wing Jews who are opposed to the government and its policies against Israel, not Hamas, against Israel after October 7th. And they ran that study for about 6 months. So that just tells you how low this liberal government, full, being upfront, I did not vote for the Liberal Party. I very much voted for the Conservative Party. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And obviously, I have my spin and I'm subjective. However, the facts are the facts.
Mhm.
And so that is really what's been happening. It's very scary. It's very scary to live in a country that is amazing, beautiful, uh,
Mhm.
full of a beacon of democracy. We have an amazing charter of rights and freedoms that is being torn apart by a authoritative party that I voted for 20 years ago because it wasn't this, right? It was more centrist right. It wasn't about censoring. It wasn't about allowing jihad and anti-Semitism to roam free in the country. But here's where we are right now. After Justin Trudeau, this is what the Liberal Party has become.
It's a real shame. I mean, with only 400,000 Jewish people in Canada, which I don't know what percent of your
Roughly, we're
population.
not, we're even a bit, we're about, I think we're about point one.
Okay. And then I compare that to
Sorry. No.
what might be the Christian community. Um, one of my projects up, in the near future is to sort of dig into the Christian community in Canada. What of that community is Christian Zionist, so to speak? I know ICEJ has a Canadian chapter. Um, because it really needs to be the Christians that can help galvanize that pushback, and whether it's at political levels locally, and that's not to say that everybody has to register with a particular political party or not, but just to get back down to common sense. Like you can't you can't be storming anybody's business because of who they are, and you have no idea what their politics are regarding Israel. And even if their politics regarding Israel or something you don't like, you still don't have a right to vandalize their property, threaten them.
And by the way, just so you
Harass.
know, Christians are under attack in this country.
Mhm.
I'm very much connected to the Christian community, and there's a wonderful Christian community in this country that, and not just from on a Zionist perspective, there's a wonderful Christian community here in this country that does a lot for the community, is devout, but reach out, etc. We've had churches being burned here,
Wow.
and when the government was asked post um, at a post-election debate scrum, when certain left-leaning leaders from the very left-leaning NDP government was asked about it, they denied that it even exists. The public broadcasters sort of played it down. But no, I believe, and again, I might be wrong on my numbers, but there's over 200 churches that have been burnt across Canada in the last 10 years. Now, again, there's happened. It just so happens that a lot of churches are getting burnt down, and the question, and there's historical reasons for it. Some of it have to do with what happened to the indigenous people here and what the Catholic Church did here. But that doesn't mean there's open season on Christians here, or
Right.
should.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of issues within Canadian societies when it comes to Christians and Jews that the Canadian government, the Canadian elite, right, progressive elite, specifically, sometimes one could argue our public broadcaster, are sort of not reporting on, fine with it happening because they want to have Canada turn into this woke progressive state where religion is, pushed
Right. It's the
without,
secularization.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
secularization
mean,
of a country.
yeah.
But there's the most violent um, faith base, unfortunately, in this
Right.
country, which is core of it, is the jihadists of this country. They're never questioned. They're never rarely
Right.
talked about.
Right.
And if you're talking about them, you're a racist.
Hmm.
Okay, let it be.
Yeah. Yeah. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. So you have the secularists, the Marxist secularists, and the sort of fundamentalists of Islam, so to speak, sort of combining forces to sort of
Look, I wrote about it
snuff out the
yesterday.
people the book.
I wrote about it yesterday. When you have the LGBTQ community siding with jihadists who would throw them off a roof, and this is not a cliche,
Nope,
it's a
not.
fact,
It's fact.
or behead them, or tie them to a bike and ride that bike all over the city as they smash their heads in. That tells you a lot about the progressive woke movement and how much they've just gone off the deep end.
Yeah, I often wonder that if that sort of marriage succeeded and they met their goal of getting rid of all the Christians and all the Jews and they were left with just each other, that would be a pretty big war um
Yeah.
between them, right?
By the way, you always see what happens, I mean, I think I saw it. Well, where was it? Was it in the States at a place where a gay activist walked into a I think an Islamic shop. I could be wrong, and he got beaten up. And so, okay, if these are the people you want to stand with, you need to understand what you're standing with. And a lot of people don't because, it's all everybody's a victim, and that whole um, propaganda that people are being taught in universities where it has no bearing in reality. But this is how Marxism took a hold in many countries, communism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it. And this is just being repackaged in 2025 as something different with, the Kafia Karens leading the way.
Right. I like that term, Kafia Karen.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite. The
Well,
KKK Kafia Squad.
that's a good one. You ought to copyright some of this stuff.
I should
Um,
sell merch. Kafia Karens.
So, Igal, we want to make sure that we continue to amplify the Killing Roads. I know we've
Yes.
had you on before to talk about that, but that is an important um, film for a variety of reasons, notwithstanding the fact that it does document and archive and prove what a lot of people are denying or said didn't happen or downplaying. And then it's just another way also to continually connect people individually to the reality of what Israelis went through and what the Jewish community at large goes through, because it is a small community and everybody seems to be 1 or 2 degrees separated from a victim or an IDF soldier that has in the last 19 months been a part of these of the defense measures and our heart is breaking from what happened in DC last night. We're recording this on May 22nd, and the folks who were at that museum of the Capital Area Jewish Museum, those are people I knew personally. People that I know personally were there and witnessed it. I can't imagine the personal trauma they're going through today. I've sent them well wishes, but I don't expect them to respond necessarily as they're dealing with a lot. But yeah, we just watched the globalized intifada come to the streets of Washington, D.C. up close and personal. And we need people like you to continue to document these things and to continue to bring the message. I can't wait to see the movie about the women and to see a female-centric approach to the Israeli heart and the heart of Jews worldwide. And we'd love to have you on again.
I'd love to
Because
come
I'm
on.
sure you have more ideas and more films in your head and upcoming, and we're happy to post your articles on our socials. So make sure you send those to me.
I
And
will.
everybody, thekillingroads.com, I'll share the link in on the screen and in our notes. It is free, and if anybody wants to do a screening and have Igal either visit if possible or at least zoom in for a Q&A, let me know. I'll get you connected. And
And
yeah.
anybody who wants to use the film in terms of public screenings and whatnot has, as long as they can stream it off the website and just show it there, not a problem whatsoever. And then if YouTube or Twitter is faster, there's also links to the movie on YouTube and X as well.
Okay, wonderful. Igal, thank you for your time today. And we wish you continued progress and success in your endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me.
Stay safe there in Toronto.